You would have seen the news this week that Pakistan has bombed Afghanistan and killed approximately 20 people near the border areas. If you had been in a time capsule, or if you had been in a time machine about even as little as 4 or 5 years ago, you would have thought this was unimaginable. That is, an Afghan Taliban government in Afghanistan and Pakistan bombing it when they had been such close friends and close allies. So I'm going to dissect this. I'm going to tell you what are the immediate proximate triggers, why were they close, why did the situation deteriorate so much, and what are the implications. Well, the immediate trigger was that in the past couple of weeks, there have been three big attacks. The first was a suicide attack on a Shia mosque in Islamabad, in which about 36 people died. This was followed by an attack on a Pakistan army post in the border areas, in which one child and 11 soldiers died. After which the Pakistanis called the Afghan ambassador and tried to give a warning. But within 2 days of that, there was another attack on a Pakistani post in which a lieutenant colonel and a soldier was killed. After that, Pakistan decided to bomb these border areas, saying that this is where the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, or TTP, finds shelter. According to the Afghan government, civilians have been attacked, and even according to Amnesty, some civilians have been killed. This is not the first time Pakistan has bombed Afghanistan in the recent past. The situation has consistently been deteriorating. Around October, you would have heard of other fear that the two countries could go to war. In fact, Qatar and Turkey arranged a meeting between the Afghan and Pakistani sides in order to diffuse the tensions. It seems now that that didn't work. Again, that round also had been because of TTP attacks within Pakistan. And if you go a bit further, in the last 1.5 years, there have been two meetings arranged also by the Chinese between Afghanistan and Pakistan, because the Chinese have investment in both countries. They have good relations and they have much at stake in both the lands. That is, they're building road infrastructure and power and dams, etc. in Pakistan. In fact, one of those dams in the border areas was a target of Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan. They blew up the dam and killed a few Chinese engineers. But even despite China's intervention, this has not calmed down. So it looks like this confrontation is going to go further south. In fact, the Afghan Taliban has said that we will retaliate at a place and time of our choosing. Well, if you go back 30 years, then the Afghan Taliban, in a certain sense, is a creation, or at least was heavily assisted by the Pakistani ISI, the Inter-Services Intelligence, and within the Pakistan Army. How did that situation come about? Well, there was a massive Soviet-Afghan war. Well, how did that situation come about? Well, after the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979, the CIA and the Pakistan Army together assisted rebels called the Afghan Mujahideen against the Soviets. And after the Soviets were pushed out in 1989, Afghanistan descended into a civil war between the different Mujahideen groups. Out of that chaos emerged the Taliban, which were a group of religious scholars, the top of whom, the top echelons, were from the Madrasa Haqqaniya in Peshawar. These Afghan students were led by a man called Mullah Omar, and they decided to bring back order and peace in Afghanistan by fighting. And they were legendary fighters who didn't care so much about their own personal safety or of their enemy. These guys also realized that there's a lot of crime going on during that civil war, rapes and all kind of things. And they were assisted by the ISI, by the Pakistan Army, because they realized that order has to be brought to Pakistan. Because they realized that a chaotic Afghanistan is not in their interest and order must be brought back. So they assisted this force, and by 1996, it was in power. Of course, as you know, the Americans invade in 2001, and they make a fatal mistake. That is, in the peace process in Bonn, after they have defeated the Taliban, they create a new government, but it consists only of those ethnicities that constitute the Northern Alliance, that is the Uzbek, Tajiks, Hazaras, and they keep Afghan Taliban out. But keeping them out in the Bonn peace process, they kept out the largest Pashtun force also, because Taliban is not just an Islamic force, it's also largely constituted of Pashtun ethnicity. Now, what is this Pashtun ethnicity? Well, it's a very large ethnic group which is spread both within Afghanistan and Pakistan. And in fact, most of them, the majority, 60%, lie within Pakistan. It is partly due to this ethnic connection also that the Pakistani state supported the Afghan Taliban. Now, from throughout this period, from 2002 onwards, the Pakistan army supported the Afghan Taliban because they felt that the Northern Alliance represented the interests of India, of Russia and Iran, and did not represent their interests. So, in hindsight, this was a big mistake by the Pakistan army, because if you want to have some influence over a country, it's better if it is a bit divided. And they should have supported the Afghan Taliban only up to the point where a peace agreement could be reached with the Northern Alliance government, such that some territory would have been with Afghan Taliban and some with the Northern Alliance. This would have meant that if one is getting out of line, the Pakistanis could have gotten close to the other. But instead, they supported the Afghan Taliban whole hog. And because the morale on the other side was so low and they were so corrupt, the American installed government, and the Afghan Taliban was so driven, they ultimately overwhelmed everybody, and the Americans also withdrew. Now the Pakistan government is forced to deal with a single entity within Kabul. So why the anger? Why did the situation now deteriorate so much? A simple reason. That is, the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan has consistently been launching attacks, suicide attacks within Pakistan with the goal of establishing a Sharia state. Now, sometimes they say the Sharia state should be all over Pakistan, sometimes only in the Khyber-Pakhtunkhwa, formerly known as the Northwest Frontier Province, that is the ethnic Pashtun province. And sometimes they say only within the FATA area, the federally administered tribal area. And over the past 1 year, they have killed over 1,000 Pakistanis. They have had about 699, almost 700 attacks. So they have become a real nuisance for the Pakistani state. And though they were created in 2007 after the Lal Masjid attack, that was a mosque in Islamabad, where some Islamic clerics had taken hostages and the Pakistani army had attacked. But within the mosque were a lot of students. They got killed. That killing of students, most of them came from the Northwest Frontier Province, along with the repeated drone attacks by the Americans and Pakistanis in that area, had created anger. That was combined with a large young male population which is unemployed and a surfeit of weapons. The weapons have been there since the Cold War Afghan jihad period. These young men who are unemployed and heavily armed are always a problem. Whether you go to Africa, whether you go to Southeast Asia, you can see that in the Middle East. And because of that, this whole region, the Pakistan-Afghanistan region, etc., also has been highly unstable. Now, why does the Afghan Taliban give these people shelter? Well, that's not complex either. During that 20-year period from 2001 to 2021, when the Afghan Taliban came back in power, they would often take refuge on the Pakistani side of the border, often with their own ethnic group, clansmen, people also who follow the same religion and have the same ideology. So they owe these people, both due to clan and ethnic loyalties, due to religious loyalties, and also because they've taken favors in the past. Moreover, there is a second reason people say, that is the Afghan Taliban does not have the bandwidth left to fight with the TTP, because large number of their own soldiers and officials are now involved in administration and police work, so they don't have enough spare soldiers. And they fear that the TTP, if removed, could also join with the Islamic State. The Islamic State, ISIL, is also now present in Afghanistan. As I said, large number of unemployed young men with weapons and religious ideologies in the mix. So the situation is not easily resolvable. Also because the Afghan Taliban itself has two power centers. One is the ultimate leader called Haibatullah Akhundzada, who resides in Kandahar. He's very religiously fundamentalist and has a very strict interpretation, such that when his own son went to him and said that I want to do a suicide attack in 2017, he not only accepted that, but gave him permission and told him that he was doing the right thing. This is the reason that Haibatullah also is against, in his interpretation of Islam, uh, women's higher education. He has banned girls in women's higher education. The Kabul group consists of three big leaders. The first is Mullah Biradar, who was responsible for the negotiation with the US in Qatar, if you recall, 5 years ago. The second one is Mullah Umar's son, called Mujahid Yaqub. Mullah Umar was the original leader of the Taliban from 1996 onwards. And the third one is the leader of a very large and powerful Taliban Pashtun family called the Haqqanis, Sirajuddin Haqqani. His base is also in eastern Afghanistan. Now, Sirajuddin Haqqani is definitely not going to abandon the TTP because he comes from the border areas where he would often take shelter on the other side of the border. In fact, the madrasa from which the Afghan Taliban itself comes, Rose, is the Madrasa Haqqaniya, named after his family. And even though these three oppose Haibatullah in Kandahar to the point that when he banned the internet a few months ago, and these three refused to comply with that. But by and large, that's the only decision on which they have refused to comply. They almost always tend to agree with him because they don't want a rift within the Afghan Taliban, because they don't want a return to violence. So Haibatullah himself is unlikely to leave the TTP either, because he's such a religious fundamentalist that for him, the religious ideology is above everything else. So this situation only looks likely to further deteriorate. The problem is India is also getting involved, and I think that's a big mistake. That is, India has made enemies out of the country that it created, that is Bangladesh, which is actually primarily a secular country, as I've explained in my previous videos, and is trying to become friends with Taliban because they are enemies with Pakistan now. Now, the problem is twofold. Pakistan is paranoid with anything related to India because India is 7 times larger, and they also fear a two-front war. If they see Afghan Taliban and India coming together, they are likely to increase pressure on the Indian border and within Kashmir. So that will create further problems for us. We don't need any further problems. The second issue is that considering how religiously fundamentalist Haibatullah is, that is the head of the Afghan Taliban, you never know when he's going to flip. So it's we should stay out of this. So we should stay out of this because the Durand Line itself is something Pakistan is paranoid about, because the Afghans have never accepted that border. They've always felt this was a colonial border drawn by the British, whether it was King Zahir Shah and the monarchy period, whether it was the communist governments under the Russians, whether it was Afghan Taliban. Nobody has accepted this border, and hence this border will remain a problem, and Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan also will remain a problem for a while to go. We don't need to get involved. We need to just sit back and watch the show.